My Master Sandals, Chapter 16. Another commercial adventure was about to begin. The idea came from my father. I had gathered the flour he suggested, using it in a new adventure selling empanadas. At first, the idea of selling the bag was crossed our minds. Flour in those days were very scarce, could have given us positive results. In one way or another, turning it into a product that would double our profit was more beneficial. We lived in Melconcieto neighborhood, belonging to Sabana Pareda in a rural area. Most inhabitants who engaged in informal trade. Large part of most of the residents were Chapio, people with temporary jobs. Therefore, the economy throughout the country was unstable. The relationship that I had achieved with the voice inside me to stay stable and secure. Everything I set out to do was handled quickly, even there was so much risk involved. And I was always initially afraid and doubtful of everything. The voice was always part of my life. It became a habit that enhanced positivity and the firm conviction that I would ever be cared for. The voice always brought me closer to reality, where I could solve a problem, build an idea, or get rid of any circumstances I needed to do. It was priceless, and I was very grateful for it. It was what was allowing me to come out of my fear, anxiety, mistrust, abuse, and doubt. I remember one afternoon in July when I was sitting on my bed meditating. All of the ideas were wandering around in my mind had been present. I needed to get ahead in life. Without pausing, I went right into the interaction with it and consulted it. I concentrated, closed my eyes as I stared the internal conversation. Tell me, is this what's going to be a good business? I want to be sure that it'll all work. The voice responded immediately. You must be convinced, have faith, and believe in yourself and everything you do. We have told you that you are the main creator of your ideas. Go ahead. In those days, the outpatient business was more accessible. Most of the population was looking for daily work then. Having a permit or license was not essential. Proving one's credibility or knowledge of something was not considered important or necessary back then. Excuse me, we went out with my father to buy everything necessary for the empanadas. The same night we got the dough ready so that the next day we would finish filling them and be able to go out and sell them. This quick process would keep the excellent flavor and cause them to be fresh and hot upon delivery. Very early in the day, we managed to produce a high-quality product. We were careful as far as hygiene is concerned and wrapped them tightly. I went out with my father, who was carrying a table, while I held the merchandise. We went to the nearby corner where we had planned to settle without disturbing others. We arrived at the chosen place, and with little fear, we started our sale. It was not easy for us to stand in the street watching people go by without knowing how to offer them what we had for sale. The truth was that it was very difficult for us to articulate any words that would be suitable. We had no idea how to sell something. We had looked at each other, waiting for the other to say something. However, the only thing I imagined to do was show them so that the empanadas would be a full view of the people who passed by. The sidewalk began to get populated with other merchants as well, who started shouting about their products. It was their shouting that gave us the idea how to sell our products. How great with our surprise which turned into joy when by mid-morning we had sold everything. Happy with my father, we returned home with the conviction of making more empanadas than we produced that day. We were dedicated to increasing sales and achieving the profits. These days were a total success. The clients consumed the empanadas in a constant and fast way. They were always able to finish working very early each day, and we quickly became well known on the corner. We started to think about dealing with the near future when the flour sack would run out. Excuse me. Flour was very scarce, and the way we had got it had not been easy. It was then that we began to experience supernatural moments in Saba Pareda house, where we had lived and produced our merchandise. Macrame is a very old technique of making knot-based weavings with your hands, which was also a great skill and mastery by the people for many years before Christ. The Arabs practiced it in Europe, and later they took it to America. This art became very popular in the Caribbean, throughout and South America. This technique was used to make all kinds of fabric, sometimes very different materials, to make different varieties. Margarita's became my father's second wife. At that time, he had divorced my mother. I continued living with them, and they had 3 more children, 2 girls and a boy. Margarita was a very different person. She was very hardworking and dedicated to the technique of macrame. She had made a bar decoration that was so large and heavy. It hung over the ceiling of the room in which she had placed liquor bottles held by a thick rope woven in macrame style. One night I was finishing working in the kitchen preparing the dough for the empanadas, and I was crossing the room. Margarita's great ornament began to move from one side to the other. We had no, excuse me, we had no animals, but since the ceiling was made of wood, I thought that some rodent or the wind had produced this strange movement. I was just so tired that I wanted to lay down without further thought. The next day, as usual, empanada routine, night came and I finished making the dough. I sat in the chair of the living room and read a book. Everyone slept, and since it was not too late, I looked to writing when the silence of full calm. Again, macrame began to move before my eyes. I tried to think of a logical reason for it. I looked for alternatives that could cause this phenomenon, and I was unsuccessful in my search. I concluded that something strange was happening. I had grown up with a religious ideology that did not allow me to even think of something supernatural. The voice alone was one thing that I had a hard time understanding. For me, that was something that exceeded my beliefs. I also could not discuss this with my father because I already knew what he would say. I got up from the chair and approached the bulky and immense item that hung in the room. I observed it for a few seconds, but it did not stop moving in front of me. I held it very tight with a little fear until it stopped altogether. Slowly I returned to my chair without stopping to stare at it. I sat down just as slow. My biggest surprise was when it started swinging again from left to right. This was a challenge. The movement was very similar to a clock pendulum, relatively slow but constant, as the ticking the sounds in time. I asked myself a question to try to figure what I was experiencing, primarily dementia. Dementia? The right illness? You were too young to have had dementia back then. Maybe you'd be mixed up with bipolar schizophrenia. Dementia had run in my family, which was the most logical explanation for what I was experiencing. I tried to calm down because the fear was dominating me. I checked to see if the little mouse was playing and hanging in them, making it move. Of course, there was not. I was scared for a moment, thinking until the voice appeared saying, "Do not fear. Everything will return to being calm. Do not fear." I returned to the chair and quickly began to observe the macrame. It stopped moving for seconds later. Still scared and intrigued sitting there, I waited more than an hour. Nothing strange happened. At midnight, I decided to go to sleep. I turned off the light in the living room and the bedroom. I was about to lie down when the voice appeared. "You must not be scared. You will understand this experience over time." Still feeling a little bit intense was my imagination. I felt like it was something far superior to me, that there was a perception somewhat far from what I could understand, more advanced and broader in each conversation. The following day, the empanada's routine continued with the excellent reception from the public. They sold very quickly, and by that time, we had made our clientele. It was hard for us to think about how the flower supply would end in a short period, that the business would come to an end. Meanwhile, we worked with the best enthusiasm and dedication. After that good day, we returned home. I did not comment on the macrame. My father was a very religious person and would not accept the story like it was valid. I took the chair and sat very close to the immense fabric hanging in the dining room. I waited for my father to let him sit down and start the conversation. Although my goal was to see if it would move again as it was happening at night, I wondered if my father would also be able to see it moving. My father talked about my grandfather. He told me some anecdotes from his youth. He also remembered the dictatorship time during the government of Rafael Trujillo Molina, President of the Dominican Republic, from 1930 to the time of his assassination in 1961. Father talked about the times where he was imprisoned in the famous jail in La Curita. He was confined to and made to clean the gardens as means to keep him from saying things that were against the government. It was that time even mentioned such opposition that could cost one his own life. Time passed normally with an enjoyable conversation I had with my dad. All of a sudden, the macrame started with the pendulum movement. I remained silent, observing what was happening. My objective was to know if it was only me that saw or could somebody else see it. My father went silent. I stared at him without saying anything. His eyes were directed at the large hanging fabric that took Margarita a few months to finish. It weighed over 100 pounds and she had initially meant it to sell her art in Punta Cana. My father very slowly searched my eyes now. For a second, we were both completely silent. Dad turned around, thinking that maybe his wife had come in. He checked if the windows and doors were closed, seeing that there was wind or a draft. When he was convinced that we were alone, he said, "Do you see the same thing as me? Or is it my imagination playing tricks on me?" Of course, it took me a while to answer because I knew of my parents' religious beliefs. He would look for an explanation that satisfied the beliefs currently held. The macrame did not stop doing the clock movement that I had witnessed for a couple of days. Dad then began to tell me that it was some curse, that perhaps it would be better to pray. He brought out his Bible that was always at hand. Amid the dilemma, Dad was propagating the Bible verses aloud. I got up from my chair in front of him and I held the macrame tightly. managing to stop its swing. I sat down again without interrupting my father's words. After a few moments of standing still, and great fabric began to move again. About 15 to 20 minutes passed. Nothing changed the paranoia. It was almost midnight, so I tried to stop it again. I got up to hold it, the great knot decorations. Dad finished his preaching, still stocked and indiscredibulous. He went into his bedroom without commenting on the subject. I turned off the light and also went to rest. I knew within myself there was something more than just a normal experience in everything I was living. It was something deeper that cloaked my existence. Yet sitting alone in my bed that needed understanding pushed me into another interaction. It had come to trust the voice that had experienced many conversations with it. Any situation where my doubts, fears, mistrust overtook me, I would call upon it. Then I had my first extensive communication with the voice that lasted approximately 30 minutes. The most remarkable thing was daring to ask who it was and where it came from. These questions clung to me because I had a whole history of family members who ended up with different mental illness types. Of course, it was emerging in my thoughts that similar mental disease had started prying on me. I was worried that I might be going crazy, or that the madness and manifesting itself in which more gravity grew in my youth. Even so, I decided to overcome all the thoughts that tormented me and continued. In the middle of the darkness of my room, I started a long conversation. Tell me if this is what my father has tried to explain to me. If you tell me not to be afraid, tell me what I am experiencing. After a few seconds without an answer, I decided to focus better and close my eyes and continue. I would like to know who you are. Given the condition from the first time, I was faced with wanting to know where it came from. This time, I asked without fear, and I got an immediate response. It is you. The voice is you. It repeated, the two of us are one. I was never convinced of that interpretation. I refused to think that that was the voice. If I was awake in my five senses and asking the question, how could I be the voice? I had to be some other entity, perhaps something imaginary. Again, with terrible thought and being entirely mad crossed my mind. However, I wanted answers concerning that voice that had always lived inside me. I calmed down by controlling my shaky breathing and again searched for answers to clear my troubled mind. If the macrame's weight was quite considerable, what causes the strange movement? The voice response was tough for me to accept because of the little knowledge I had at that time. All the things you pay attention to become the experience that you are unconsciously creating with your mind. The explanation seemed too absurd to me. I could not imagine that I was causing this tremendous ornament to move. I insisted on asking several times about if both the voice and I had known me were the same. It was a long moment back and forth where I asked, who are you? Who am I talking to? Who is answering me? The answer was always the same. It is you. The voice is you. The two of us are one. I ended up tired and fell asleep until the next day. 3 days passed after what happened with the macrame, and my father had told Margarita about everything we saw. The story spread the neighborhood, and the neighbors would curiously approach the house to attest what had been told to them. The immersed knotted fabric did not move while they waited in our home for an expected event. Only in the morning hours before my father and I went to sell the empanadas, the strange phenomenon occurred again. For around 20 minutes, the macrame kept moving like a clock. This time, Margarita saw it in astonishment. Dad tried to hide his nervousness. I just kept arranging the merchandise like usual until I got ready to go off and sell it like every day. For a few people, they kept coming to our house to see if the macrame kept moving. It only ever did in my presence. I never said anything. I just kept quiet so not to disagree with my father. However, I realized that this was happening only when I was there. Days later, the rumors started about the owner wanting to evict us because of witchcraft being seen in our home. There were many disagreements with all of this. On the top of the strange occurrence, the flour sack became empty, and there were no resources to get another. There was still a shortage of flour in my country, and we would have to travel again if we wanted to obtain some. The events taking place in our home caused Margarita to leave La Roma. She wanted to continue making macrame and looking to do a business. She went far away to a house in the country. My firm religious believing father also went to a friend's house, and I returned to seek refuge with my mother. After we had left, the owner of the house decided to burn the macrame piece because of its perceiving to be possessed by evil spirits. The estrangement ultimately led my father's separation from Margarita. Without flour, the business could not continue either. My time at Villa Faro ended with my father's loving life being shattered, the empanada business fizzling out, and the macrame being burnt. My Master's Sandals, Chapter 17. In 1888, Don Andres Brugal, a Spanish citizen, went some time to Cuba. He gained experience in manufacturing rum. In Puerto Plata, he founded a company with his last name, Brugal and Company. The company through the years acquired international recognition as it originated in the Dominican Republic. Producing a variety of flavors, it had managed to position itself in one of the most essential rum factories in the entire Caribbean. It was the third most popular company in America and Europe. My father established a working relationship with one of the descendants of this prestigious family. He was hired through the recommendation and set out to repair and install electrical solutions for one of the rum company plants in Puerto Plata. Among these things that his father kept with great pride was a card stamped with Brugal's prestigious surname. The simple chance he had found the card, and he decided to help me find a job working with him. My father wrote a letter asking the boss to hire me, reminding him of how pleasant it was to work for his company. I got some clothes and headed towards my new destination, Puerto Plata. It was a dream with a dream in tow. I left one morning changing my horizon and forging myself a path of progress. I was very positive and became the letter I had under my arm and carried a lot of weight in the Dominican. After all, the name was very reputable, and it was rare that one would have such a treasure. During my trip, many ideas and dreams were created in my mind. I was accompanied by the unusual hope that everything would change. I was just approaching 20 years old, and I had lived so far to be quite a lot for a boy my age. I was very captive by the city full of hotels surrounded by beautiful beaches. Tourism was the center that dominated its economy. I arrived at the address and indicated that the one I had reviewed carefully before leaving. Once in front of the office building, I took out my magic letter with enthusiasm and a little nervousness. This would serve as a presentation to request an interview with the project manager, engineer, Eddie Brugal. I went to the office, presented myself to the secretary. After asking about Don Eddie Brugal, I gave him all the information. He asked me very politely to wait because the engineer was not there. In the center of the room, there was a photo magazine with many colors on the cover on top of a rectangular table. It caught my attention. I looked through it and kept from being bored while I waited. The pages showed great project and extended along the entire area of the beach. It had some golf courses, and I had never seen or even could have imagined. After a few hours, Don Eddie Brugal rushed into the office without offering a greeting. I understood his busy schedule, but I had to wait a little longer. Finally, when the time came, the secretary led me to his office. I was very nervous but quite firm as I hesitated my step with my letter in hand until I got in front of the engineer. He observed me closely, seeing I was young, and asking for an appointment with him. Sir, good afternoon. I am the son of Carmelo Kelly, the person you worked with on construction projects when I was very young. My father was an electrician. My name is Israel Kelly. It is a great pleasure. Those were my first words in front of this prestigious businessman. Extending my hand, I said, I am bringing with me a letter made by my father to remind him of the friendship and affection he maintains for you, and ask for your help for me respectfully. Without hesitation, Don Eddie Brugal remembered my father's name and began to recall those distant memories with great pleasure. After having reviewed the letter, he said, How is your father? What a great worker and a great electrician. He worked for many years. I remember him, and I also have a lot of appreciation for him. His words filled me with great pride and joy, awakening me once again a dream of being able to get a better chance at life. Thank you very much. He's fine. I come here to ask for a job opportunity. I know several languages. I would love to enter the hotel world. I have tried working different jobs in Santo Domingo, but with little luck. The engineer got up from his seat and came over and gave me a rather fatherly hug. Then, his finger on his chin, walking sideways, he said, I am going to give you money to stay in a motel very close to here. It is low season, it's almost 5, and it's too late in the day to decide. But come back calmly tomorrow and we will see what we can do for you. I thanked him for his kindness. He gave me the details of the motel and a ride through his secretary. I left his office with money provided and with the magazine I had taken from the office table with permission. I was thrilled to have achieved my first goal. I settled in a small motel in the city, in solitude and silence that night. The tranquility and the euphoria blurs by the encounter with new hope. However, questions of doubt began to appear in my mind. I wondered if what the engineer said, the season is low, could that be lack of appointment? This could force me to return empty-handed to Santo Domingo. The frustration of thinking about what was created, a total lack of positivity, and a feeling overtook me. After a short absence, the voice appeared. Use your creativity. Use your creativity. The magazine and colorful photographs on its cover. The one that caught my attention in the office was next to me on the nightstand. I took it to review the contents more closely. Apart from the beautiful landscape, modern hotels, and the great tourism project of Playa Dorada, there was being built. I observed great golf courses and all their brilliant infrastructures. I set out to read all the written notes referring to the sports and the implement with great and remarkable space it was given. While this was happening, again the voice said, "Keep thinking. You must create. Use your creativity." I thought for a moment and then was very tired. I went to sleep. With the directions in hand, I took the bus to Playa Dorada with the magazine folded in my pants back pocket. I made it to the office without difficulty. Don Eddie Brugal was not there. I waited for him a long time until he arrived. I greeted him very cordially. He told me to go for a walk around the project while thinking about where I could stay because he did not have a job placement for me. I had to understand that this was multi-occupations. I should be very patient with him. I could not pretend that I was his priority. I had to stay humble. I left without problem and began to tour the great project of Playa Dorada. An office patio adjoined one of the golf courses with the vast greenish landscape where the view was on the hill. I immediately impressed after just taking a few steps. There was a group of sports cars, just like the ones in the magazine. They were all parked in order. A fairly large mechanical work closed the box. Very cautious, curious, I stayed at the entrance. One of the people noticed my presence and asked me if I needed help. I replied that I worked for Don Eddie Brugal. The man, upon hearing this famous surname, invited me to come in and see the place. I asked a lot of questions regarding golf carts. It was one of the things that aroused my curiosity. I couldn't think of any of the develop everything that was drawn in my mind. After a good time I was sharing with these kind of people, I decided to go back to the office. I said goodbye, and on my way, I asked the voice about this. I was still afraid of not having a job. I said, "Please help me. Let the fear disappear. Help me to create." I kept repeating this phrase until I got back to the office. I felt the need to ask his secretary for some scissors and immediately went into the bathroom. I started cutting while words leafing through the magazine, trying to find some message. Suddenly, still without joining them, I took the word inspector. Then the phrase golf carts. I put them on top of the photo with the same reference, and I joined with the half of the last sheet, which was mostly white. Within my documents, I looked in my wallet for a passport-sized photo of me, which I found and put it in the middle of the finalized idea. I went to the bathroom, carefully not to take my new business card apart, and asked the secretary for adhesive tape to finish it. However, when seeing me holding the cutout, she was surprised by my creation. She offered me glue and that it would hold better together. Don Eggy Brugal rushed came rushing in the noon hour when he saw me. He invited me to enter his office. At that moment, I was observing his grim face. I knew that this was not good news. He waited for me to sit down and began saying, as I told you yesterday, my season is low. Many people live here in Puerto Plata without work. It is challenging now to get you a job at this time. I can't think of anything. My intuition did not fail me. The bad news had come to an end. My father's letter couldn't stop working. Deep inside, I kept hoping that my creation would reverse things. Then I said, Don Eddie, with all due respect, if you place me to take care of the golf carts, monitor them, and make sure they are in good condition and that the clients receive the appropriate ones, that would be great. I have been observing that nobody cares for them. The engineer took my card in his hand, smiled, and very comforted said, Boy, I cannot let you go. With an intelligent and daring person, that position does not exist. But we are going to let you create it today. Your father must be proud of you. I will not let him down. He stood up and together he handed out the project. I walked with Don Eddie through the golf club's area with joy that I could not hide. There were places that they brought me to where permits to play golf and sold golf balls. He introduced me to the personnel in charge. He said, This boy is from Santo Domingo. The golf cart company sends him. He will be in charge of them, everything to do with them from now on. Let the supervisor know. All the workers were very kind to me and they received me well. His recommendation had a virtual weight and I thanked him for the opportunity. I was full of happiness. I promised to give my best. That was the day I began a 3-year-long experience in the city of Puerto Plata. In a matter of hours, the whole situation that seemed dark changed. The value I obtained was such precious recommendation helped me to get along quickly with the staff. One of the caddies offered me a pension to stay. He was one of the people who assisted golfer regarding the certain terrain and types of clubs to use in the game, going around and helping golfers. We talked during the time he showed me the facility. I told him that I had to find where to stay. It was that Ignacio told me that he lived on the second floor of his house and that he had right to rent it out. At the end of the workday, he took me to Cristo Rey neighborhood in Puerto Plata, where the place was located, and from that moment, I stayed to live in that place. Very carefully the next day, excited and very happy, I went to what would be my first day at work. Very sure of myself, I assigned myself a golf cart, which would be used to take me on tour the enormous projects. I was also very cordial. In each hotel I went to, I consumed food and drink without paying any attention, without paying anything for it. It was part of the pay of doing my job, and I was very grateful for it. The consequences of having had Don Eddie Brugal was what brought me the fantastic treatment that was given to me in each of his facilities. The hotel would begin to occupy an important place in my life. I made constant surveillance throughout the area each day. With the golf cart, I ensured that the clients received the best care. Many of them already had membership and permission to play, so they only sought my authorization to use a cart or transport themselves comfortably around the Relationships with influential people became more frequent. I began to have a different social touch than usual. The project grew in the organization, and the service in all its lines increased. As the day passed, I sought to continue advancing myself in doing different things as it grew. As the months passed, I experienced became more and more veritable. The staff treated me exceptionally well, and my social touch with people within the hotel branch increased. I had beautiful happiness about me because of experience much radical change of the events in my life at this time scarcely did not touch me. I had everything I needed. I began to know different perspectives because of this new world and way of life. It was linked to all the change that occurred in me. The wonderfulness, the locations, beaches, seeing vacationers and tourism, and a diversity of women. I saw that the life was not always bad, and I was very thankful for this, as this kind of life was everything I always hoped for and wasn't sure it actually existed. At work, I was otherwise very comfortable and happy. I was living the best life possibly and full of comforts. Although the pay was not very good, I had all kinds of facilities for free, such as access to restaurants. My needs were provided for through such the access rather than because of receiving cash in hand. I began to see that cash I had always focused on receiving was not the only legal means of being provided for. The magic of the circumstances began to mix with going out to discos, casinos, and between co-workers. I was just dedicated to enjoying myself. Perhaps having grown up in the home where there was material warmth was minimal, there were times in my life I wanted to feel certain affection towards a girl. I hardly ever went beyond a dream, though. It formed a sentimental emptiness in me and lack of affection. I longed for the tenderness, for a kiss at night before sleeping, a hug and being told I was loved. This form of lack made me a person who devoted to love and confused what love even was or how love was shown.